What's going on? This is your man John Fortune, your host of the Frustrated Fan Sports Show. And today I'm going to talk about the firing of Davey Martinez and Mike Rizzo from the Washington Nationals. Not the greatest day for the Nationals, especially when you're talking about losing your general manager who was able to accomplish a lot with being hamstrung by ownership who would spend money and then all of a sudden would refuse to spend money. These are the biggest penny pinchers that we've seen in sports since Donald Sterling. And we know how awful of a person he is. But the learners, for some reason, are penny pinching so much. And it's now gotten to a point where it almost seems comical for them to have fired their only successful general manager that they've ever known. I mean, Mike Rizzo was here when the team came from Montreal, and the only star that they had at the time was Alfonso Soriano. And to know that he was able to navigate that. I remember when we had Dimitri Young and we had all these guys who could possibly be something special, and they never panned out. We've seen Mike Rizzo go from bringing in all young guys and basically losing Bryce Harper when everybody felt that it was going to be the end with Bryce Harper left. Bryce Harper leaves and we win the World Series. Then Mike Rizzo was then cuffs were placed on him again, told that he basically was probably told that he had to reduce payroll, and then sat up there and did something that was absolutely astronomical. Traded away Juan Soto and got everything that we currently have back in those trades. So we were seeing that Mike Rizzo was rebuilding again, because understand this, the first rebuild took just as long. Everybody forgets that first rebuild took a very long time. Very long time. And it wasn't easy for Mike Rizzo to have to accomplish what he did with the limited amount of funds that the learners were pushing out. Probably telling him every year, well, we'll pay this person, but we won't pay this person. We'll pay this person, but we won't pay this person. Remember, we lost Jordan Zimmerman because of the fact that, we lost him, and he was one of our best young pitchers. Thank God we were still able to win the World Series, but we lost him too early. And we saw in real time the disintegration of Steven Strasburg. Just saw him disintegrate right in front of us. We paid him tons and tons of money. Just saw him completely disintegrate. And Mike Rizzo was able to still operate around that by bringing in a guy like Max Scherzer. Mike Rizzo did everything he could to make sure that he was fielding a competitive team. And to be quite honest, to watch the Nationals fire him and Davey Martinez was a bad thing. I know people are talking about, well, it took 6 years and it might take I know they're going to say that. I know they're probably already saying that. But you also have to understand that Even though it was taking 6 years, they were fielding an extremely young team. What I would have rather see is ownership stand with Mike Rizzo and Davey Martinez. It would have been nice to see ownership say, nah, we believe in Mike, we believe in Davey, and that's what it is. Because they were fielding an extremely young team. Young team, young players don't know what they really are supposed to do. And you got to also understand, at some point, Davey was probably sitting up there. Davey and his coaches are probably sitting there telling these young guys, do this, do this, do this, do this. And every time they probably see them doing things that it's like, didn't we go over this in practice? Didn't we practice this? Didn't we tell you to not do this? Why are you still doing it? You're doing this in the game. Can we please stop doing this? Which is why when Davey came out and said, it's not the coaching, it's the players. That was him finally fed up with having to repeat the same thing over and over and over again. And let's not pretend we ain't seen coaches and managers do that before. Everybody forgets it how Ron Rivera was criticizing Jonathan Allen and Deron Payne. Everybody forgets that. But he did that. And he was praised about doing that. Everybody forget when Jay Gruden criticized Robert Griffin III, even though that was deserving. But still, it was done. At some point, you get tired of telling youngins the same thing over and over and over again. I went to the game where they had against the Marlins. I went to that game and saw as a lot of them were swinging at pitches that they had no business swinging at. And they were up in the 5th inning and somehow found a way to lose. And that was because every time a lot of them came up the bat, they just swung at the bat. They just swung at any ball that was coming down the middle. At that point, that's not coaching. At that point, it's like, why do you keep swinging at stuff? We tell you, be patient at the plate. And you're rushing. You act like you're in a rush to get off the plate. That's what's not being talked about. A lot of them are sitting there and that game was like some of the fastest outs I've ever seen. That game was over in a matter of nothing. And that was because they kept striking out, kept striking out, kept striking out. So at some point, there is a time when it's not coaching, it's actually the players. And now what? We expect for the interim coach to who are coaches that are still on the staff that have been telling them the same stuff over and over again. So guess what's going to happen? Now the message goes from Davey Martinez to the next manager repeating the exact same thing Davey Martinez was saying. It would have been nice if ownership would have said, these young players need to act like they want to play. They need to listen to their coaches, and we are behind Mike Rizzo 100%. See, the problem that happens now is that a lot of these baseball fans forget that baseball is not the same baseball that it was years ago, where there was a lot of plate discipline. Everybody forgets that. At one time, there was plate discipline that we've never seen before. The reason Barry Bonds got the home run record wasn't because he was steroided out, because he had incredible plate discipline. A lot of these guys are missing the plate discipline. Being patient at the plate. Not rushing to hit anything that comes down the pipe. And that's the problem. That's what Davey Martinez was talking about. That's where Davey Martinez's frustration was coming from. That's where Mike Rizzo's frustration was coming about. Because it's like these guys, like y'all got to understand, the team that they're fielding is so talented, extremely talented. And they're not listening. They're not being patient. They're not taking their time. That's why they look so bad. That's why they're losing games they're not supposed to be losing, because they have poor plate discipline. And for anybody who's watched baseball, you can see it. Some of their, like if you watch the Nationals game, the Nationals games feel like they're like an hour long and then it's over. Because they're rushing. Even the pitchers. Sometimes the pitchers are rushing to get out the innings and are actually extending the innings. Mike Rizzo was an incredible general manager. Absolutely incredible. Knew his job. You're not going to tell me that because he wasn't doing analytics and it wasn't analytics focused that this man didn't know his job. I mean, understand, the talented roster that we got is because of Rizzo. Do you think that if Rizzo can do that, grab that much talent without analytics, imagine all the teams that are using analytics and still can't win? Think about that. Everybody, well, this team's payroll is low. Yeah, that's fine. But that team, like, whenever anybody talks about, like, the Florida Marlins and all that, they always find a piece of gold somewhere. The Florida Marlins have done what most teams refuse to do, and that's basically adopt the Puerto Rican League. That's basically what they've done. They go down to those Latino places and they snag them about 4 or 5. And they get good development. They get very good development. And they'll develop guys for like 4 or 5 years. And it don't even matter. Because everybody talks about how low their payroll is. And then when a guy starts to get up there and he's about to make money, they jettison him out and bring somebody else in that's just as talented and younger, and you don't have to pay him. Mike Rizzo did that. Mike Rizzo was doing that. This team is young. It would have been nice if ownership would have stuck beside Mike Rizzo. Mike Rizzo is probably one of the greatest general managers that has stepped in Washington. And we're talking about, like, understand, we haven't had many. When you talk about the spectrum of the city sports leagues, we haven't had a lot of them. You talking about we had Bruce Arena, Bobby Beathard, Charlie Casserly to some extent, oh my God, from the Caps. Oh my God, I can't believe George McPhee. You know, even Ernie Grunfeld to some extent, even though, you know, he was one that would make a trade that was crazy, but then sign somebody that was just as good. So, but again, Mike Rizzo was probably one of the top 2 when it comes to this. You know, like a guy who knew what he was doing. And to see the ownership jettison him is absolutely crazy. If I was Mark Lerner, I would just go back to the George Steinbrenner playbook and bring Mike Rizzo back. Just like what George Steinbrenner used to do with Billy Martin. He would fire Billy Martin and bring Billy Martin back. Fire him, bring him back. Fire him, bring him back. Bring Mike Rizzo back. And understand that they've made mistakes along the way when it came to the managers too. How many of y'all remember when Jim Riggleman, after on an 11-game win streak resigned because of the fact that they wouldn't give him a long-term extension. Remember that? Remember that? Remember they fired Dusty Baker when Dusty Baker basically had the team turned around? Remember Mata and his struggles with the team? And he wasn't a bad one either. Remember Matt Williams and his struggles? Others might think that it's okay that Mike Rizzo was fired. I'm of the opposite side. It was not right to fire Mike Rizzo. It really wasn't. It wasn't right to fire Davey Martinez, especially when you're talking about dealing with a young roster. It would have been nice if the ownership stood up and understood the level of talent they had in their front office and sitting on their bench, because they didn't win the World Series without them. So now you're going to have to figure this out. Now you're going to have to figure this out and hope and pray that it doesn't collapse even further without Mike Rizzo at the helm. Man, y'all tell me, how do y'all feel about this whole thing? Do y'all feel that I'm off base? Do y'all feel the same way I feel? Like they should have stuck, that ownership should have sat up there and gave the exact same message that Mike Rizzo and Davey Martinez was giving, and with the understanding that this roster is young and they're not listening like they're supposed to. Y'all tell me what y'all think. Other than that, this has been your man John Fortune, and it's been a Frustrated Fan Sports Show.